What if the headlines you read barely scratched the surface? What if the Chanel store incident wasn't about bad behavior, a misunderstanding, or a PR stunt, but the public facing ripple of something that had been building for years? Because the truth is, once you hear the details, you'll realize the official version was only a fraction of the story. The call didn't come from my usual contact. The number was blocked, the voice calm and clipped, like someone reading from a script they'd rehearsed hundreds of times. They didn't ask if I was available. They told me where to be and when, and hung up before I could even confirm. When I arrived at the Chanel flagship store, the sun outside felt brighter than it should have been. Crossing the threshold was like stepping into a world under glass. Temperature controlled, air filtered so clean it almost stung to breathe. The faint scent of Chanel No. 5 hung in the air, but layered beneath it was something sharper, metallic, like the air in a jewelry vault. There were no tourists at the windows, no casual browsers wandering the aisles. Only employees in tailored black, standing unnaturally still, their gazes drifting past me as though my presence had been expected but not acknowledged. The usual pre-event chatter, talk about lighting, client lists, wardrobe arrivals, was absent. Instead, every movement felt measured, like someone was counting each step. Even the sound inside was strange. I could hear the faint whir of climate control vents, the subtle shift of fabric when someone moved, but no music, no street noise filtering in, no phones buzzing. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears feel like they're straining for a frequency just out of reach. The restricted area wasn't set apart with any sign or rope. You could walk right past it without realizing it was there. But once you noticed, you couldn't unsee it. The door's matte surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, so the gold emblem etched into it almost floated against the black. It wasn't any logo I'd seen, neither Chanel's interlocking C's nor anything resembling a designer mark. It was angular, but fluid, with curves that caught the eye and pulled it inward. The longer you looked, the more it seemed to change shape, like it was shifting in place when you blinked. The hallway leading to it was lined with mirrored panels, but they didn't reflect like normal mirrors. The images were subtly off, colors a shade too warm, distances slightly skewed, as if you were watching yourself through water. Every time I walked past, my reflection seemed to turn its head a fraction slower than I did. It wasn't just me who noticed. A delivery runner, arms full of garment bags, slowed as he passed me one afternoon. He glanced toward the door, then toward me, and mouthed a single word, "Careful," before hurrying on without breaking stride. The first time I saw it open, it wasn't dramatic. No sudden burst of light or rush of air. Just the smallest shift in the alignment of the door, enough for a warm glow to spill into the hallway. Inside, the air felt heavier, as though the temperature had dropped and the pressure had risen at the same time. The walls were lined with mirrors, but not for trying on clothes. They were angled so none of them reflected the person standing in the center. Instead, each one seemed to be catching something else. Patches of gold, shadows moving in places the room didn't have. Jennifer Lopez stood barefoot on a small square of inlaid marble that looked older than the rest of the store. Her outfit wasn't part of any Chanel collection I'd seen. Simple fabric in a color I couldn't quite name, almost shifting between ivory and pale ash, depending on how the light touched it. In the corner, that black lacquered table sat like a stage prop nobody was meant to touch. The gold microphone on it was clearly antique, the spirals engraved so deeply they caught and bent the light. The glass bowl beside it shimmered as though something beneath its surface was alive, despite the air in the room being still. At first, I thought the vibration was coming from somewhere in the building. A hidden generator maybe, or an HVAC unit kicking on. But the rhythm was wrong for machinery. It pulsed in uneven intervals, almost like it was responding to something unseen. The hum didn't come from one direction. It seemed to arrive from all sides at once, crawling up through the floor and down from the ceiling. My chest tightened as it grew, and for a moment, I could feel the pressure in my teeth, the way you do when an airplane changes altitude. Then, layered beneath it, voices began to emerge. Soft at first, almost indistinguishable from the vibration. They weren't speaking in any language I recognized, but the cadence was deliberate, a sequence of sounds that felt rehearsed. It wasn't a song. It was closer to an instruction, one that made my hands twitch toward my sides as though I was meant to stand a certain way. Jennifer's eyes opened, fixing on mine through the fractured maze of mirror angles. Her gaze didn't flicker, didn't waver. It wasn't the look of someone noticing they were being watched. It was the look of someone who'd been waiting for you to be exactly where you were, exactly when you were there. And then, without moving her lips, a single word pressed into my mind. Now. When I finally found myself outside the Chanel store, it was as if I'd skipped a reel of my own life. I don't remember walking through the sales floor or passing the security desk. One moment I was inside that fitting room. The next I was in my car, headlights bouncing off the darkened shop fronts as if they were watching me leave. The city outside looked wrong, like every street lamp had dimmed just a little, every color desaturated by a single shade. My hands stayed locked on the steering wheel, but my knuckles were pale, bloodless. The hum was still with me, softer now but steady, the way a headache lingers after the worst of it has passed. When I got home, my phone battery was nearly dead, even though I'd barely used it. I checked my gallery and froze. There was a single photo I didn't remember taking. My own face, caught mid-blink in that back hallway. Pupils blown wide like I'd been staring into the sun. The timestamp read 3:33 a.m. That was hours after I'd left. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed with my eyes open, certain that if I closed them, the hum would swell and I'd find myself back in that room. And yet, I could still hear it. Faint, patient, almost curious. The next morning, I told myself I'd put it out of my mind. But the more I tried to forget, the more I noticed things that shouldn't connect, but did. In the quiet corners of the internet, archived forums, locked threads, file-sharing sites hidden under layers of encryption, there were whispers about similar encounters. Sometimes the names were different, sometimes the locations, but the patterns were the same. A closed-off space, mirrors angled strangely, a hum that seemed to bypass your ears and sink straight into your chest. One grainy phone video caught my attention. A concert crowd, mid-song, suddenly fell silent. Not just the audience, but the performer too. For 12 full seconds, they all stood completely still, eyes fixed on nothing, before the show continued as if nothing had happened. The uploader claimed the clip had been removed 3 times before it finally stuck, and even then, the sound dropped out during those 12 seconds. I started keeping notes, symbols I recognized, timestamps, recurring numbers like 2:22 and 3:33. Every incident seemed to orbit around them. And then there were the missing posts, testimonies that would appear, gain a few quiet comments, then vanish without explanation, the accounts deleted. I thought I was done with her after that night. But a few weeks later, I was on another assignment, a corporate event in a bland, glass-walled convention center. By all accounts, it should have been the opposite of what I'd experienced at Chanel. Halfway through my shift, a sealed black envelope appeared on the reception desk. No one claimed it. Inside was a single card with block lettering. Room 414. Deliver at once. No interaction. The floor plan didn't list a room 414. It took me through a service corridor I'd never seen before, past stacked crates and disused lighting rigs. The air got cooler with each step. At the end of the hall was another matte black door, exactly like the one at Chanel. Same gold emblem. Same way it seemed to absorb every stray reflection. It opened the instant I approached. Inside was darkness so dense it felt textured, like velvet pressed over my eyes. The air had weight, like it was resisting my breathing. And then, from the center of the room, she emerged. No stylist, no glitter, no smile. A deep maroon cloak shimmered faintly as she moved, light catching and sliding off it like oil. Her skin was pale in a way that wasn't unhealthy. It was luminous, unnatural. She didn't speak, but I didn't need her to. I understood she'd been expecting me. Behind her, a single mirror stood, not reflecting the here and now, but a past moment. Me, outside that Chanel fitting room. The exact angle I'd seen her at before. Only this time, my reflection's eyes moved after mine did, a heartbeat too slow. After that day, I stopped pretending it was a coincidence. I went looking for answers in places I'd once thought were nonsense. Religious anthropology blogs, scanned pages from out-of-print books on ritual magic, recordings of chants so old no one could trace their origin. I learned about symbols carved into gold to anchor certain types of energy. About mirror arrangements meant to act as openings, not for looking in, but for letting something through. About sound frequencies so precise they could slow a heartbeat or quicken it in unison with others in a room. Every note I took made the Chanel fitting room make more sense. The angled mirrors, the spiraling emblem, the gold microphone. They weren't stage props. They were instruments. And the hum wasn't an accident of acoustics. It was part of a sequence, one meant to draw every person present into the same pulse, the same beat, until they were all perfectly synchronized. And once they were, something else could happen. I wanted to believe this was just her. Some strange, isolated eccentricity of Jennifer Lopez's inner circle, but as I kept asking quiet questions in the industry, the same look kept flashing across people's faces. A flicker of recognition, followed by a careful choice to say nothing. One lighting tech told me, in an almost whispered voice, about a fashion house event in Paris. Different celebrity, different brand, but the setup was eerily similar. A section of the venue closed off for private fittings, the mirrors angled wrong, the air dropping 10 degrees as soon as the star stepped into the space. Another guard I knew from high-end events mentioned cold corridors, without me bringing it up. His description matched Corridor C at Chanel almost exactly. That faint, heartbeat-like pulse of light from somewhere no one could find, and the unspoken rule that you didn't linger there. The strangest was a hairstylist who'd been flown in for a major film premiere. She told me she'd been warned, on arrival, to avoid direct eye contact with the lead actress on the day of the event. When she asked why, the reply was simple: she's different today. It took me time to accept what all of this meant, that the celebrity persona was a mask, the luxury and glamour just a stage set for something older and much harder to name. Every kindness campaign, every empowerment tagline, every designer collection, it wasn't just branding, it was camouflage, a way to keep the public fixated on the surface while something else moved underneath. And it wasn't about converting anyone, not in the way cults or conspiracies work. It didn't matter if you believed or not. The moment you stepped into that room, stood in that hum long enough for your pulse to align with it, you were part of the sequence. You didn't have to say yes. You didn't even have to understand what you were agreeing to. Recognition alone was enough. That's why the hum never stopped once you'd heard it. It wasn't just sound. It was a mark. Months passed before anything else happened. I'd convinced myself that changing jobs, avoiding luxury events, and keeping to small, low-profile gigs would keep me clear. Then one night, I came home to find my apartment exactly as I'd left it, except for the dining table. At the center sat a porcelain cup, white, heavier than it should have been, its gold rim catching the light in a way that made it seem to glow faintly from within. No note, no packaging, no sign of how it had gotten inside. I went straight to my door camera feed, expecting to see someone at least approach the apartment. Instead, there was a gap. 4 hours of missing footage, cleanly cut out as if time itself had been erased. Next to the cup was a black envelope. I opened it. Empty. When the Chanel store incident broke in the press, the coverage was shallow. Gossip blogs painted it as a diva meltdown. Claims of staff being dismissed from the floor, customers told to leave, Lopez refusing to emerge from a private fitting area for over an hour. The entertainment segments treated it like a funny, eye-rolling story. What didn't make the headlines was the part no camera could capture. The hum, the angled mirrors, the spiraling gold emblem on that black door. The fact that no one, not the staff, not the guests, remembered exactly when she'd entered or left. The incident wasn't about a purse or a necklace locked in the back. It was about closing a space off from the public just long enough for a process to take place. A process I'd already seen and now recognized for what it was. The Chanel store was just another stage, smaller than a stadium, quieter than a gala, but no less controlled. I wasn't looking for it when it happened. It was the middle of the night, and I was letting YouTube autoplay whatever it wanted, half asleep on the couch. Suddenly, the screen went black. Then a single shot faded in. Jennifer Lopez, alone in a dim room. No music, no audience, just her, standing still, looking directly into the lens. "The thing about beauty," she said, pausing long enough for the silence to feel alive, "is that it was always just the trick." Then came the smile. Not the public smile. Not the one in interviews. This was the one from the fitting room. The one that felt like it was seeing you, not looking at you. The screen cut to black. In the quiet that followed, I realized I'd been holding my breath, and faintly, so faintly I thought I might be imagining it, the hum returned. Since the Chanel store, I've been to other cities, worked other jobs, tried to convince myself that I stepped out of that current before it could pull me under. I tell myself that as long as I don't cross that kind of threshold again, I'll be fine. But thresholds aren't always places. Sometimes they're a sound, a number, a pattern of light at the edge of your vision. And once you've stood in the hum long enough, you start realizing it's everywhere. Not constant, but patient. It doesn't chase, it waits. I still see her sometimes. Not in person, not on red carpets or magazine covers, but in flashes. Reflections in the side of a bus window, the corner of a shop mirror, a paused video frame that doesn't match what came before it. And always, the same look. Not recognition in the way you remember someone's face, but recognition in the way a stage remembers the performer who once stood there. Because that's the part the media will never tell you. This wasn't about Chanel. It wasn't about Jennifer Lopez. It wasn't even about that room. Those are just sets. Temporary theaters for a performance older than all of them. A performance that doesn't stop when the audience leaves, because the audience was never really who it was for. The stage doesn't close when the curtain falls. And if you've been in the right room at the wrong time, you're still on it.